Welcome to Valid History. Here, old photos tell real stories from the past. Please subscribe, like, and share to help keep history alive. After 17 terrifying hours trapped beneath earthquake rubble in 2023, rescuers finally reached two siblings buried in the debris, pulling them alive from the wreckage and turning a desperate search into a powerful moment of survival. In 1920, Mary Ann Bevan, a widowed mother suffering from acromegaly, was cruelly given the title World's Ugliest Woman, a label that reflected the harsh attitudes of the time rather than the difficult life she endured. In Pennsylvania in 2013, 5-year-old Jocelyn Rojas was kidnapped by a man offering ice cream, but teenagers Tamar Boggs and his friend chased the car on bicycles for 15 minutes until the kidnapper released her. Captured in a Gestapo mugshot in Munich in 1943, 21-year-old Sophie Scholl had been arrested with her brother Hans for distributing leaflets urging Germans to resist the Nazi regime, an act of courage that ended with her execution. At the Pittsburgh Zoo in 2012, 2-year-old Maddox Derkosh fell into an African painted dog enclosure after being placed on a safety railing despite warnings. And before rescuers could act, the tragic incident had already claimed his life. In 1978, a reporter assigned a routine obituary for Mary Dofour kept investigating until he uncovered evidence she had actually been Anna Merrill Sizer, a woman whose family had left her in institutions for the criminally insane for 50 years. On September 11, 2001, blind survivor Michael Hingson depended entirely on his guide dog Roselle, who calmly led him down 1,463 steps from the North Tower's 78th floor through smoke, fear, and chaos to safety. Photographs taken inside Iraq's Abu Ghraib prison in 2004 exposed U.S. soldiers abusing detainees, and Army reservist Sabrina Harmon appeared smiling in several images, later receiving a 6-month sentence despite facing up to 5 years. During the heated 2008 presidential election, a photograph captured a group of self-described rednecks publicly supporting Barack Obama, reflecting an unexpected political moment during one of the most closely watched campaigns in modern American history. On October 21, 1966, a massive landslide of liquefied coal waste roared into the town of Aberfan, Wales at over 80 miles per hour, killing 144 people, including 116 children, in one of Britain's worst mining disasters. In 1990, the Ku Klux Klan created a hate hotline using a fake Mr. Rogers voice to send racist messages to children. But television host Fred Rogers sued and won a federal injunction, forcing the recordings to be destroyed. On November 17, 1961, 23-year-old Michael Rockefeller disappeared during an expedition in New Guinea after his canoe capsized on a journey studying local tribes along the Arwimi River. And despite extensive searches, he was never seen again. In the mid-1960s, Angus Barbieri, weighing 456 pounds, underwent a medically supervised fast lasting 382 days, surviving on drinks and vitamins while losing 276 pounds and ultimately reaching his goal weight of 180 pounds. In 1886, a grandmother sat proudly for her very first portrait, a quiet moment from the 19th century captured forever in a photograph that preserves the dignity and personality of an ordinary life. High above the East River in 1915, workers carefully painted the towering structure of the Brooklyn Bridge, maintaining one of New York City's most iconic landmarks through dangerous labor performed high above the bustling city below. In 1942, the Nazi regime kidnapped Zita Seuss as part of a program targeting children considered desirable, giving her a new identity and family before the war ended, and she was later placed in an orphanage. Taken on the morning of April 26, 1986, this rare photograph from Chernobyl shows the nuclear plant shortly after the disaster began, its heavy grain caused by intense radiation already damaging the film. In 1985, Jeremy Bamber stood at the funeral of his parents, sister, and nephews, a grim gathering that later took on chilling significance after he was convicted of murdering them at his family home, White House Farm. At 5 o'clock in the morning on May 8, 1910, young paper boys gathered in St. Louis, Missouri, preparing bundles of newspapers before sunrise as they began the long day's work of delivering the news. In the days following the attacks of September 11, 2001, people around the world gathered in grief and solidarity, mourning the victims and reflecting a global moment of shock, remembrance, and shared human sorrow. During the 1970s, the U.S. Army experimented with designing grenades the same size and weight as a Nerf football, hoping American soldiers' familiarity with throwing the popular toy would improve accuracy in combat. Captured in the 1980s, a simple photograph shows a child absorbed in an ordinary moment, unaware that the quiet routines of youth would later be remembered as some of life's most carefree days. In 1952, a Chevrolet and a Ford Model A drove through the dense oil fields of Signal Hill in Long Beach, California, a striking reminder of the industrial landscape that fueled America's growing post-war economy. Taken sometime in the 1980s while he was an undergraduate student, this photograph shows Barack Obama standing beside his grandparents, a quiet family moment long before his future rise to the presidency. In 1981, newly elected Burlington Mayor Bernie Sanders was photographed picking up trash in a public park himself, a small but symbolic act following his first electoral victory in the city. On August 28, 1930, a zookeeper carefully poured water over a penguin to cool it during a hot day, a simple act of care captured in a photograph from an earlier era of zoo life. From his hospital bed in the 1950s, a patient casually purchases cigarettes, a striking glimpse into a time when smoking was still common even inside medical wards, reflecting how differently health risks were understood. In 1936, young Princess Elizabeth, later Queen Elizabeth II, stands quietly in the garden of 145 Piccadilly in London, an ordinary childhood moment captured before the responsibilities of a future monarch reshaped her life. In 1868, a Native American stands overlooking the newly completed Transcontinental Railroad, witnessing a powerful symbol of expansion that transformed the American landscape and permanently altered the lives of indigenous peoples. In 1920, workers carefully shaped the massive structure of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., slowly transforming stone and scaffolding into the monument that would honor Abraham Lincoln and become a lasting symbol of American history. During the 1930s, legendary silent film star Charlie Chaplin stands beside towering Italian boxer Primo Carnera, the striking contrast in size creating a memorable meeting between two famous figures from very different worlds. In Paris in 1919, aviator Charles Godefroy boldly flew his aircraft through the narrow opening of the Arc de Triomphe, navigating a wingspan of 9 meters through a monument just 14.62 meters wide. In 1896, a 15-year-old Pablo Picasso painted his first self-portrait, and by 1972, at age 90, his final self-portrait reflected a lifetime that produced more than 50,000 artworks. In 1945, aviation pioneer Igor Sikorsky sits proudly inside the Sikorsky H-5 helicopter, representing the realization of his vision and a major step forward in the development of practical helicopter flight. At the Woodstock Music Festival in 1969, bold clothing and unconventional styles became symbols of youth culture, capturing the rebellious spirit and creativity that defined one of the most famous gatherings of the era. Taken in 1840, the first known photograph of Niagara Falls captures the powerful cascade long before modern tourism transformed the site, preserving an early visual record of one of North America's most famous natural wonders. In a rare, relaxed moment, Albert Einstein is photographed wearing simple, fuzzy slippers, offering a quiet and human glimpse of the brilliant physicist whose ideas reshaped modern science. During the 1800s, wealthy British landowners commissioned exaggerated paintings of their livestock, often depicting animals with large, rectangular bodies to emphasize prosperity and status within rural society. In Butler County, Missouri, in 1939, an evicted sharecropper family lives in a temporary camp, reflecting the harsh economic realities faced by many farming families during the difficult years of the Great Depression. When a 1,300-year-old tree was cut down in 1891, its rings revealed centuries of history, each circle marking a year and silently recording the passage of time alongside major events in human history. Introduced in 1954, the German Messerschmitt Kabinenroller microcar reflects post-war Europe's need for small, efficient vehicles during a time when resources were scarce and practical transportation was essential. Between 1887 and 1889, workers in Paris gradually raised the iron structure of the Eiffel Tower, transforming Gustave Eiffel's ambitious design into the landmark that would soon dominate the city skyline. In 1955, what would later become the famous Las Vegas Strip appeared far less developed, offering a rare look at the early stages of a place that would eventually become one of the world's most recognizable entertainment districts. In 1917, a young soldier stands beside his mother just before leaving for World War I, capturing a quiet and emotional farewell shared by countless families during the years of global conflict. In Hollywood during the late 1920s, legendary lawman Wyatt Earp stands beside a 1926 Packard Model 326 Opera Coupe, only a short time before his death in Los Angeles in 1929. In 1989, former U.S. President Ronald Reagan is photographed with half his head shaved before undergoing skull surgery following a fall from a horse, revealing a rare and vulnerable moment in his later years. In 1839, American photographer Robert Cornelius created what is widely considered the first photographic self-portrait by setting up his camera at his family's lamp shop and sitting motionless for several minutes. Off Catalina Island in 1903, fisherman Edward Llewellyn caught an enormous sea bass weighing 425 pounds, setting a world record that became one of the most famous catches in early 20th century sport fishing. Taken shortly before his death in 1845, one of the few known photographs of President Andrew Jackson captures the 7th President of the United States near the end of a life marked by controversy and influence. After the devastating San Francisco earthquake of 1906, shattered streets and exposed ground revealed the San Andreas Fault itself, offering a dramatic visual reminder of the powerful forces that reshaped the city. In 1937, photographer Eric Salomon secretly captured one of the only photographs of the U.S. Supreme Court in session by hiding a camera in a sling while pretending his arm was broken. In 1933, during the height of the Great Depression, makeshift Hooverville shantytowns appeared across New York City's Central Park, reflecting the desperate living conditions faced by many Americans during the economic crisis. In July 2005 in Balad, Iraq, 19-year-old U.S. Army Private Lavina Johnson was found dead in her tent, a case officially ruled a suicide, but one that has remained deeply controversial. At Hiroshima in 1945, the intense heat of the atomic blast permanently etched the shadow of a person into stone, leaving behind a haunting imprint of the moment the bomb detonated. In 2000, after enduring 12 hours of severe pain, a Mexican woman performed a cesarean section on herself, making a 17-centimeter incision and surviving the extraordinary and dangerous act without medical training. Photographed in 1949, child actor Bobby Driscoll later struggled with substance abuse and died at age 31, his body discovered in an abandoned building and buried in an unmarked grave. In Louisiana in 1938, a father stands proudly beside his wife and their 13 children, a powerful image of family life during a time when large households were more common. In Damascus in 1889, blind Muslim Ahmed carries his paralyzed Christian friend Samir, whose guidance through the streets served as Ahmed's eyes, while Ahmed provided the strength that allowed them to travel together. On September 11, 2001, survivors Joanne Capestro and a coworker from the 87th floor of the World Trade Center's North Tower wander through thick dust in New York City after the South Tower collapsed. On December 13, 2003, U.S. forces captured former Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein near Tikrit after a 9-month search, discovering him hiding in a small underground bunker known as a spider hole. In 1999, actor Robert Downey Jr. was photographed after receiving a 3-year prison sentence related to possession of cocaine, heroin, and a firearm during a troubled period in his life. In 1931, Mahatma Gandhi stands outside 10 Downing Street in London during negotiations with British leaders, representing India's independence movement on the world stage. High above Manhattan in 1925, workers balanced on steel beams while building the growing New York City skyline, performing dangerous labor hundreds of feet above the busy streets below. In 1952, rain falls across New York City streets as pedestrians move through the wet avenues, capturing a quiet, everyday moment in one of the world's busiest cities. Taken more than a century ago, a group of smiling Victorian boys pose proudly for a photograph, offering a lively glimpse into childhood during the late 19th century. In a charming photograph from an unknown year, a young boy proudly sits in a homemade cart, pulled by his goat, capturing a playful moment of childhood creativity. In 1930, a daring construction worker building the Empire State Building hangs from a crane high above New York City, illustrating the dangerous work required to raise one of the world's tallest skyscrapers. At Naval Base Great Lakes in 1917, thousands of sailors arranged themselves into the shape of the American flag, creating a striking patriotic display during the years of World War I. In 1901, a young immigrant child arrives at Ellis Island, stepping into the United States through the gateway that welcomed millions seeking new opportunities. In 1993, paparazzi photographers gather around the White House cat belonging to President Bill Clinton, capturing a humorous moment of media attention in Washington. In London in 1935, Padaong women known for their distinctive neck rings sit together playing cards inside a hotel, a rare moment of everyday life far from their homeland. Taken in 1977, one of the final photographs of Charlie Chaplin shows the legendary filmmaker late in life, closing the long career of one of cinema's most influential pioneers. In August 1964, more than 3,000 workers who built the Chase Manhattan Bank headquarters in New York City gathered together for a photograph near the completion of the massive project. In 1975, orphaned babies from the Vietnam War were transported by airplane to the United States, part of an effort to relocate children displaced by the conflict. In Pocahontas County, West Virginia, a photograph shows a poor country girl walking toward Buckeye School, a quiet glimpse into rural life and childhood in America. Taken on January 11, 1929, this final photograph of legendary lawman Wyatt Earp was captured just 2 days before his death in Los Angeles at the age of 80. In 1945, one of the final photographs of Adolf Hitler shows him standing near the entrance to the Berlin bunker, where he would die only hours later as the Second World War neared its end. A quiet crowd gathers beneath glowing screens in Times Square on May 14, 1998, as New Yorkers pause in the streets to watch the final episode of Seinfeld, sharing a rare public moment of nostalgia for a sitcom that defined a decade. High above Manhattan on September 20, 1932, photographer Charles Ebbets captured 11 ironworkers calmly eating lunch on a steel beam 850 feet in the air, creating the iconic image later known as lunch atop a skyscraper. In the early 1980s, Sylvester Stallone stepped behind the camera to direct Staying Alive, a sequel to Saturday Night Fever, with John Travolta returning as Tony Manero in a story about ambition and artistic redemption. Just outside the east wing of the White House, the Jacqueline Kennedy Garden appears in a 1987 photograph, a peaceful space first envisioned in the early 1960s by First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy with horticulturist Rachel Lambert Mellon. Albert Wolson, the last verified surviving veteran of the American Civil War, once served as a teenage drummer boy in the Union Army and lived until 1956, reaching the remarkable age of 106. During World War II's Battle of Britain, farmers painted bold white stripes on cows so drivers could see them during nightly blackouts, when restricted headlights meant even livestock needed protection on darkened rural roads. Captured in 1895 by physicist Wilhelm Röntgen shortly after discovering X-rays, this haunting image of a human hand became the oldest surviving X-ray photograph, marking a breakthrough that forever changed how doctors examine the human body. In 1966, NASA's Lunar Orbiter 1 turned its camera back toward home and captured humanity's first photograph of Earth from the Moon's vicinity, revealing our planet from a distance never before seen. In 1899, French biologist Louis Boutin used specially developed equipment to photograph beneath the sea, producing one of the earliest underwater images and opening a new path for studying marine life and the hidden world below. Taken in 1925 in Morocco's Atlas Mountains, this photograph is believed to show the last Barbary lions seen in the wild, a powerful North African subspecies later driven to extinction through hunting and habitat loss. Stefan Bibrowski, widely known as Lionel the Lion-Faced Man, became a famous circus performer in the early 20th century, his appearance shaped by hypertrichosis, a rare condition that caused thick hair to grow across his face and body. A plane passes over the ancient city of Baghdad in a 1930 photograph, offering a rare aerial view of its dense streets, traditional buildings, and historic landmarks during a period of rapid transformation in the region. This haunting photograph shows one of the last known Tasmanian tigers, or thylacines, a once widespread carnivorous marsupial that disappeared forever in 1936 when the final individual died in captivity at Hobart Zoo. Born on July 10, 1856, Nikola Tesla, an ethnic Serb from what is now Croatia, would grow into one of history's most influential inventors, shaping modern electrical technology through groundbreaking scientific ideas. Photographed in 1912 during its maiden voyage, the Titanic sails confidently as the largest and most advanced passenger ship of its time, carrying more than 2,200 people from Southampton toward New York. In 1957, 15-year-old Elizabeth Eckford of the Little Rock Nine walks alone toward Central High School in Arkansas, surrounded by an angry crowd, a moment captured by photojournalist Will Counts during the struggle for school desegregation. Born in Rome in 1884, Jean Libera lived with a rare parasitic twin attached to his abdomen, a condition that later made him a widely known figure in early 20th century sideshows and exhibitions. Hans Langseth, born in Norway on July 14, 1846, became famous for growing the longest beard ever recorded, a remarkable feature that secured his place in history as a man remembered for extraordinary patience. In 1977, reggae legend Bob Marley sits on his tour bus with a bandaged toe, the same injury that would later develop into the illness that ultimately led to his death in 1981. This photograph from the 1870s preserves the quiet presence of a young woman from another era, offering a rare glimpse into everyday life and portrait photography during the late 19th century. In the 1940s, photographer Paul Popper documented the harsh living conditions of Dublin's Cumberland Street slums, capturing a stark view of crowded homes and daily struggle within the Irish capital. A young Phil Collins appears in a photograph from the 1960s, long before global fame, capturing the early years of a musician who would later become one of the most recognizable voices in popular music. In Kentucky in 1964, an 18-year-old coal miner stands after a day of grueling work where low wages, dangerous equipment, and exhausting labor defined life in a region where simply having a job was considered fortunate. A snapshot of 1960s, America reveals the decade's distinctive hairstyles, reflecting changing fashion, youth culture, and the bold personal styles that came to define a generation. In 1892, workers in Minnesota's logging industry moved through dense forests, part of the demanding labor that supplied vast amounts of timber during a time when logging shaped the region's economy. In Appalachia, Kentucky, in 1964, children gather for a surplus commodity supper of biscuits, gravy, and potatoes, while newspapers pasted on the walls reflect simple efforts to keep their home neat. A massive chain built for the Titanic's anchor is photographed in 1909, its enormous iron links revealing the immense engineering required for the great ocean liner before it ever touched the sea. In 1935, a woman sits at a specially designed piano made for people confined to bed rest, showing how inventive designs allowed music to remain part of life even during long periods of recovery. New York City struggles through the Great Blizzard of 1888, a historic storm that buried streets under deep snow and brought one of the most powerful winter disasters in American history. On May 29, 1953, Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary reached the summit of Mount Everest, becoming the first confirmed climbers to stand on the highest point on Earth. In 1901, 63-year-old Annie Edson Taylor climbed into a wooden pickle barrel and became the first person to survive going over Niagara Falls, an astonishing stunt that quickly captured worldwide attention. William Patrick Hitler, the nephew of Adolf Hitler, eventually fled Germany, publicly denounced his uncle, and later served in the United States Navy during World War II, earning a Purple Heart. In 1940s London, a young girl sits quietly with her doll outside the ruins of her bombed home, a simple scene reflecting the civilian toll of war during the bombing of Britain. In 1917, a determined woman stands outside the White House holding a protest sign, part of the suffrage movement demanding voting rights for women in the United States. In Germany in 1923, children stacked piles of paper currency during a time of severe hyperinflation, when the once valuable German mark had fallen so dramatically it was often worth less than $1. In 1945, the city of Dresden lies in ruins after devastating World War II bombing, leaving shattered buildings and silent streets as evidence of one of the war's most destructive air raids. In September 1918, 2 women carry a heavy block of ice while working as ice deliverers, part of a demanding job that supplied households before electric refrigerators became common. Suspended high on a cliff face, a couple rests on a portaledge secured by a strong bolt, showing the unusual way climbers sleep while scaling steep rock walls far above the ground. In 1899, a chainmaker stands beside his heavy tools, representing the skilled industrial labor that forged the strong metal links used across ships, factories, and infrastructure during the late 19th century. Inside his Colorado Springs laboratory in 1899, inventor Nikola Tesla sits beside his powerful magnifying transmitter, surrounded by experimental electrical equipment during one of the most famous periods of his research. In 1963, the notorious Alcatraz prison closed permanently on its isolated island in San Francisco Bay, ending decades as a maximum security facility that once held criminals including Al Capone and Robert Stroud. In an early 19th century photograph taken from a hot air balloon, the Great Sphinx appears partially buried in sand, long before major excavation and restoration revealed the monument more clearly. In 1939, during the Great Depression, children pose with a bicycle and a cat, a small moment of happiness captured during one of the hardest economic periods in American history. On May 20, 1910, 9 reigning kings of Europe gathered in London for the funeral of King Edward VII, creating the only known photograph showing so many monarchs together. At London Heathrow Airport on January 21, 1986, the entire British Concorde fleet assembled to celebrate 10 years of supersonic passenger service, a striking display of aviation technology. When Yellowstone became the world's first national park in 1872, visitors were already traveling to see wonders like Old Faithful, long before famous events of the American West had yet occurred. In 1973, a young boy sells lemonade from a small stand in his front yard, a familiar scene of neighborhood life and childhood enterprise in suburban America. In 1946, a woman rides her bicycle while balancing buckets of milk, illustrating the everyday routines that shaped daily life in the years following World War II. This quiet scene from 1930 captures an ordinary moment from the past, a simple reminder of how everyday life once unfolded in an earlier generation. On January 15, 1919, Boston's North End was struck by disaster when a 50-foot tank holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses suddenly burst, sending a powerful wave through the streets that at one point rose nearly 25 feet high. On July 17, 1944, Moscow witnessed the parade of the vanquished as roughly 57,000 captured German soldiers, including 19 generals, were marched through the city streets following their defeat by Soviet forces in World War II. Towering at 6 feet 9 inches, Edmund Kemper stands beside California prison guards, a chilling reminder of the American serial killer who murdered 10 people between 1964 and 1973, including his own mother. Born on April 3, 1930, Calvin Graham shocked the world when he enlisted in the United States Navy during the World War II at only 12 years old, becoming one of the youngest known American servicemen. On March 14, 1951, after leaving a birthday celebration in Princeton, Albert Einstein turned toward waiting photographers and briefly stuck out his tongue, creating one of the most recognizable and playful images of the famous physicist. In 1934, filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl peers through a large camera while preparing to record the Nuremberg Rally in Nazi Germany. Footage later transformed into the controversial propaganda film Triumph of the Will. Born in Dallas, Texas on January 30, 1946, Paul Alexander spent most of his life inside an iron lung, a powerful image of survival shaped by the lasting effects of polio. On May 13, 1912, photographer Lewis Hine documented a group of young Doffer boys working inside Aragon Mills in Rock Hill, South Carolina, revealing the harsh reality of child labor in American textile factories. Born in 1866, Jack Bonavita became one of the early 20th century's most famous lion tamers, captivating audiences with daring performances that placed him face to face with powerful wild animals. This photograph captures Boston, Massachusetts in 1907, offering a glimpse into the city's streets and architecture during the early years of the 20th century. In 1890, impoverished children in East London were photographed amid the crowded streets and difficult living conditions that defined life for many families during the late Victorian era. A sweeping view of Manhattan in 1931 reveals the dense skyline and rapidly growing city that had already become one of the most recognizable urban landscapes in the world. Inside Salem, Massachusetts, this small stone jail cell once held accused individuals during the Salem witch trials of the 1690s, one of the most infamous episodes of mass hysteria in American colonial history. Captured in 1884, this photograph shows the only known image of a tarpon, a wild horse species that would disappear forever when it was declared extinct in 1909. Taken shortly before departure in 1937, Amelia Earhart stands beside navigator Fred Noonan before their attempt to circumnavigate the globe, a journey that ended when their plane vanished over the Pacific Ocean on July 2nd. In 1945, investigators discovered a chilling message written in lipstick on the wall of Frances Brown's apartment, left by the lipstick killer and reading, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more." In 1899, a Caspian tiger from the Caucasus was photographed at the Berlin Zoological Garden, preserving an image of a powerful big cat subspecies that would later disappear from the wild. A cameraman films high above Baker Street in London in 1930, capturing a rare moment of early filmmaking as cameras documented life in one of the city's most famous locations. Photographed in 1857 by James Robertson, the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul stands as a monumental landmark whose towering structure reflects centuries of history and architectural achievement. At the 1896 Olympic Games in Athens, the first modern Olympic marathon concluded with a historic victory that crowned the inaugural champion of one of sport's most legendary races. In 1900, the original railroad and suspension bridges stretched across the reversing falls in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, linking engineering ingenuity with the dramatic natural power of the tides. An 1873 photograph frames Egypt's Great Pyramid rising beside the ancient Sphinx, two monumental structures that have stood for thousands of years on the desert plateau of Giza. In this photograph, actress Elizabeth Taylor appears beside Karl "Alfalfa" Switzer, a child star widely known for his role in the Our Gang comedy series. In 1956, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara sit together inside a Mexico City jail, a moment that came before their revolutionary campaign would soon reshape the history of Cuba. At the Kennedy Space Center in January 1986, the parents and sister of Krista McAuliffe watch in shock as the Space Shuttle Challenger explodes shortly after launch. In the 1930s, a pair of parents carefully guide their bundled baby across the ice while skating, capturing a quiet family moment of winter recreation. Seen through the lens of Pierre-Yves Petit in 1920, the streets of Paris appear alive with movement and architecture following the First World War. In 1912, the busy streets of Paris reveal a fascinating mix of early automobiles, horse-drawn vehicles, and pedestrians sharing crowded roads. In 1964, Park Avenue in New York City stretches between towering buildings and busy streets, presenting a clear view of mid-century Manhattan urban life. In 1930, passengers step aboard the British airship R-101, one of the largest airships of its time, during an era of optimism for lighter-than-air travel. Aboard the Staten Island Ferry in New York in 1895, passengers gather along the deck as the vessel carries them across the harbor. During a 1925 flight from London to Paris, passengers sit together inside an early commercial aircraft while watching a movie. In 1969, at the Los Angeles Greyhound Terminal, travelers sit in rows watching coin-operated television sets in a public space. Inside their Beverly Hills home in 1958, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward stand together in the kitchen, capturing a quiet domestic moment. Photographed in 1996, Paul Tibbets, the pilot who dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, appears decades after the historical event. In 1936, actress Paulette Goddard appears in a scene from the film Modern Times, directed by Charlie Chaplin, in a photograph by Max Munn Autry. In the White House Rose Garden in 1975, soccer star Pelé and President Gerald Ford share a playful moment with a soccer ball. At Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro in 1965, Pelé performs his famous bicycle kick, an iconic moment in the footballer's career. Inside the Pennsylvania coffee shop in 1943, customers sit at the counter and tables, presenting a typical American diner scene during the World War II. In 1963, commuters sit closely together inside a New York City subway car while reading their morning newspapers. On August 14, 1945, in New York City, people sit along a curb surrounded by confetti, celebrating the announcement that World War II had ended. In Washington, D.C., in 1921, a small group of people gather around a damaged automobile after a crash on American streets. Around 1863, passengers ride inside one of the earliest trains of the London Underground, a revolutionary transportation system in Victorian Britain. Around 1950, at the Nevada test site, groups of people stand and watch as an atomic test takes place in the distance during the Cold War. Inside a Pepsi factory in Baltimore, Maryland, in 1956, rows of machinery and workers handle the industrial bottling and production process. Captured in the early 20th century, the ancient city of Petra in Jordan stands carved into rock cliffs, the former capital of the Nabateans. In Philadelphia in 1918, citizens gather to examine a newly printed map of Europe to see how borders changed after the First World War. Taken in 1976 from windows on the World Restaurant atop the World Trade Center, the photograph reveals a sweeping view of New York City. In 1942, a young Marilyn Monroe, only 16 years old, appears in a photograph taken at her first wedding. Between 1890 and 1900, a photochrome image shows young women standing together on Marken Island in the Netherlands in traditional clothing. In Oakdale, Morgan County, Tennessee, in 1910, an unidentified family stands proudly in front of their home before it was destroyed by flooding. In 1925, photographer Harry Warnecki convinced the NYPD to reenact the moment officers stopped traffic so a cat and her kitten could cross. In 1930, photographer Margaret Bourke White sits on an eagle-shaped gargoyle high atop the Chrysler Building in New York City. In Cannes, France, in 1957, Pablo Picasso gives a drawing lesson to his children Paloma and Claude, captured by René Bury. In 1962, Piccadilly Circus in London bustles with traffic, pedestrians, and glowing advertising signs during the lively early 1960s. Around 1905 at Coney Island in New York, families and friends gather along the beach for picnics and seaside recreation. In 1969, the band Pink Floyd appears together during the early years of their career as an influential progressive rock group. In 1989, Pink Floyd performs in Venice, Italy, during a famous concert staged on floating platforms in the lagoon. In Manchester, United Kingdom, in 1975, a lineup of police cars stands ready along the street, showing British law enforcement vehicles. In London in 1965, police officers hold back a large crowd of excited young fans gathered outside Buckingham Palace. In 1974, in Cambridge, Ontario, police officer John Shuttleworth stands waist-deep in floodwaters during a severe Canadian flood. Following the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, police officers patrol the streets during widespread fires and chaos. In 1968, at the University of Leuven in Belgium, police officers face Flemish student demonstrators during the Leuven-Vlaams protests. In 1928, a police photograph shows Josip Broz Tito after he and protesters attempted to free an arrested baker in Zagreb. In 1934, a Polish policeman stands equipped in full assault gear, representing law enforcement equipment of the interwar period. In 1965, workers polish the stainless steel surface of the Gateway Arch in St. Louis while suspended 630 feet above the ground. In 1889, at Utah's Sugar House Prison, a group of prisoners convicted of practicing polygamy posed together during the 19th century. Chinese sailor Poon Lim sits on the life raft where he survived alone for 133 days before being rescued in 1943. In 1983, Pope John Paul II meets and speaks with Mehmet Ali Aka, the man who attempted to assassinate him, inside a prison cell. A portable record player from 1982 represents the technology that allowed people to carry and play vinyl records more easily. In 1877, at Covent Garden Market in London, Porters carry boxes filled with plants through the busy trading center. Around 1890 in Tbilisi, Georgia, photographer Ermakov captures a portrait of a Caucasian nobleman from Imertia named Ovalyani. In Missouri in 1863, a Union soldier poses for a portrait during the American Civil War, representing those who served in the conflict. In Krakow, Poland in 1912, an autochrome photograph by Tadeusz Rząsa shows a bride and groom in traditional wedding attire.